Ethan had never imagined that a single step onto the surface of Zyphora would change everything he thought he knew about humanity and diplomacy. The planet shimmered beneath a sky of pale green, with twin suns casting long shadows over the crystalline towers of the capital. Zyphora was a world of precision and order, where every movement, every word, and every gesture had meaning. Humans were rare visitors here, and most Zyphorans viewed them with suspicion, thinking them fragile, unpredictable, and simple. Ethan, an envoy sent from Earth, had been prepared for this, or so he thought. He stepped carefully through the palace gates, feeling the cool hum of energy fields brushing against his skin. The guards were statuesque, their armor gleaming with an inner light. Their eyes, large and violet, studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away. Yet he stood firm. Humans might not be as physically imposing as Zyphorans, but they had a different strength, the kind that came from courage, patience, and quick thinking. He hoped it would be enough. The palace itself was awe-inspiring. Walls of polished crystal reflected every ray of the twin suns, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that danced across the floor. Hovering platforms moved silently, carrying servants and officials in a silent ballet of duty. The air was filled with a soft, musical hum that seemed to echo the planet's heartbeat. Ethan could feel it vibrating through his chest, making his pulse quicken. As he entered the grand hall, the court fell silent. At the far end, on a throne of translucent crystal, sat the queen. Her presence was magnetic and terrifying at the same time. She was taller than any human, with silver hair that flowed like liquid metal and eyes that seemed to look straight into the soul. Around her were advisors and nobles, all watching Ethan closely, whispering to one another in a language he could not understand. He had memorized the basic gestures and formalities, but he knew he would need more than memorization to survive this encounter. Ethan's mind raced with the protocol he had learned. Wait for her to speak. Speak only when addressed. Avoid sudden movements. But before he could even make his move, chaos erupted. A small figure darted across the polished floor. Ethan barely caught sight of it before the child disappeared behind him. He froze, unsure what had just happened. The humans present in his delegation gasped. The court gasped. The queen's face, normally composed, shifted in surprise. The child was small, no more than 4 or 5 Zyphoran years old, with bright amber eyes that shone like molten gold. She pressed herself against Ethan's back, hiding her face, trembling as though the world itself were trying to crush her. Even the queen looked stunned. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. The advisors murmured and guards hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or respect this unprecedented moment. No human had ever been so close to the royal child before, and certainly not in a way that made the child feel safe. Ethan didn't move. He didn't reach out immediately. He simply let the child stay behind him, feeling her small heartbeat against his back. There was a moment, a long, tense moment, when everyone held their breath. Then he spoke softly in English, though the child seemed to understand the tone rather than the words. "It's okay," he whispered. "I won't hurt you. You can trust me." The child's instinct was to hide behind a human, a species she considered fragile and unpredictable. That simple act challenged every expectation she had of both the child and the human. Ethan slowly turned his head, glancing toward the queen. He kept his expression calm, respectful, yet steady. His hands remained visible, open, and empty. He was careful not to appear threatening. The queen's voice, when it came, was calm but carried authority. "Child," she said in the common language of Zyphora, "come forward." The court was silent, all eyes on the human who had become a shield for the royal child. Ethan felt a strange surge of pride. Not for himself, but for what humans could do, small acts of courage, empathy, and instinct that could shift the perception of an entire alien court. Humanity had a way of surprising even the most advanced civilizations, and he realized that sometimes bravery was not in the weapons one carried, but in the willingness to protect others. Slowly, the child inched out from behind him, still clinging to his sleeve. She looked up at the queen, then back at Ethan. It was clear that she trusted him, at least for the moment. The queen's lips pressed together. She gestured with a delicate hand, and an advisor approached, bowing slightly. "Explain," the advisor said, his tone cautious. "Why is the human shielding her?" "I only ensured she was safe." The court murmured. This small human, fragile by appearance, had done something none of the Zyphorans expected, earned the child's trust and maintained decorum in a palace where every step was scrutinized. The child finally released Ethan's sleeve and stood beside him, small but determined. She held his hand lightly, a gesture that spoke more than words. The queen's eyes softened slightly. It was a fleeting moment, but in that instant she saw the potential of humans, not just as diplomats or visitors, but as beings capable of heroism in quiet, unexpected ways. One of the advisors leaned closer to the queen. "Majesty, shall we remove the human? This is unprecedented." For now, she had been frightened, and now, for the first time, she had chosen to trust. That trust was precious, fragile, and potentially dangerous in the intricate politics of the Xyphoran court. Ethan made a silent promise to himself and to her. He would protect her, not for glory, not for favor, but because humans had a way of acting on instinct, of caring even when the consequences were unknown. That instinct, he realized, could sometimes change the course of history. The queen observed quietly, and for the first time Ethan sensed curiosity in her eyes, a curiosity about humanity, about its courage, and about what a single human could do when faced with the unexpected. The entire court seemed to lean forward, holding its collective breath. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped closer to the queen, Lyra by his side. "Your Majesty," he said, keeping his voice steady, "I mean no disrespect. I only wish to ensure her safety, that is all." The murmuring of the court grew quieter, replaced by a tense anticipation. Ethan had survived the first moments in the Xyphoran palace. He had protected the child. He had faced the queen and not faltered. And most importantly, he had done what humans often did best, act with courage, empathy, and quick thinking in a moment that seemed impossible. As he glanced down at Lyra, he realized this was only the beginning of their journey. There would be tests, challenges, and dangers ahead. But for now, in this crystal hall under twin suns, a human had proven that even in the face of alien authority, humanity could shine. And that small, quiet act of bravery would ripple far beyond the walls of the palace, changing the way Xyphora saw humans forever. The queen rose slightly from her throne, her eyes never leaving Ethan. "Let the court witness," she said slowly, her voice calm but carrying an unspoken command, "that the human has not harmed my child. Let him stay for now." Humanity had made its mark, not with technology, not with weapons, but with heart. And that, he knew, was only the beginning. The palace corridors were quiet after the court session, but the silence carried tension rather than peace. Ethan walked slowly beside Lyra, keeping his hand lightly on her small shoulder. She followed him closely, glancing around nervously. Every corner, every polished wall seemed alive with observation, and Ethan knew that the palace had eyes everywhere. The guards and advisors might be distracted by decorum, but he could feel the undercurrent of watchfulness. "Do not worry," he said softly, speaking to her in the few phrases he had learned in the Xyphoran dialect. Lyra nodded but stayed close, as if the slightest separation would allow the palace itself to swallow her whole. Ethan didn't mind. Humans understood instinctive trust. If a being sought safety, humans would give it. That trust, fragile as it was, could be stronger than the most advanced security systems. They reached a side hallway, narrower and less ornate than the main court. The walls here were lined with flowing crystal panels that glimmered with the planet's light. Ethan studied their reflections, noticing faint figures moving behind the walls, palace attendants, advisors, perhaps even spies. He realized he needed to find a place where Lyra could feel secure while he assessed the danger. "Who are they?" Lyra whispered, her small voice barely audible. "People of the court," Ethan replied carefully. "Some are friendly, some are not. We must be careful." The child's life was caught in a battle she did not fully understand, and yet she had chosen to trust a human. That fact alone impressed Ethan. Humans could surprise even the most advanced civilizations. They reached a small alcove, partially hidden behind a decorative screen. Ethan guided her inside, crouching beside her to make her feel safe. "You can stay here for a moment," he said softly. "No one will see you." That had been proven in the hall just minutes ago, and he knew it would be needed again. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement. A guard approached, his violet eyes scanning the hallway. Ethan remained calm, keeping his body relaxed and hands visible. The guard paused near the alcove, tilting his head, and then walked on. Ethan exhaled slowly. Humans had a way of blending in, of not appearing as threats even when the odds were against them. "They want to control me," Lyra said suddenly, her voice trembling. Ethan froze. "Control?" he asked gently. "Who?" Xyphorans were known for psychic abilities, though humans had no real way to measure them. Lyra was young, but if she had a talent that could influence the court, it would explain the urgency of her fear. More importantly, it explained why she had run and hidden behind him. She was seeking protection from someone who would not see her as a tool. "You're safe with me," Ethan said firmly. "I won't let anyone force you to do anything you don't want. We'll figure this out together." Courage mixed with empathy could break patterns that even advanced civilizations could not predict. They stayed in the alcove for some time. Ethan observed the hallway through the crystal panels, noting the movement of servants, guards, and minor advisors. Each one seemed tense, aware that the child had chosen a human as a protector. The subtle fear and curiosity in their steps told Ethan everything he needed to know. The court was not united, and a single human could disrupt its order simply by acting with integrity. "You are not like them," Lyra said softly after a long pause. Ethan looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "You only want to help." Ethan felt a quiet warmth at the contact, a reminder that even in a world of alien technology, complex politics, and psychic powers, trust and courage could change everything. Suddenly, a sound echoed down the hallway. Ethan tensed. A guard was approaching quickly, his movements precise and determined. Ethan crouched lower, keeping Lyra hidden. The guard paused, scanning the area, and then spoke in the court's formal tone, though it was loud enough for Ethan to hear. "Child of the princess, report." Ethan held his breath. The crystal panels refracted the light, creating patterns that confused the guard's perception. Ethan subtly shifted, keeping his body relaxed, his expression neutral. Humans had a talent for improvising in moments of tension, and this was one of those moments. The guard tilted his head, scanning the hallway one last time. Ethan stayed perfectly still. Then, without a word, the guard turned and walked away. Ethan exhaled quietly. Another minor victory, but in the palace of Zyphora, minor victories often determined survival. Hours passed as Ethan and Lyra remained in hiding. She revealed little about her abilities, only that she could sense emotions and influence thoughts in subtle ways, though she was not yet skilled enough to control them fully. Ethan listened, learning everything he could without judgment. Humans had a way of understanding beings who could not speak fully, simply by paying attention, by noticing small gestures and feelings. That understanding would be crucial in the days to come. Finally, the corridor was clear. Ethan led Lyra to a secluded chamber, a room meant for minor palace guests and protected from the eyes of most officials. It was small but comfortable, with soft lighting and a view of the city's shimmering towers. Lyra hesitated at the entrance, then stepped in, her eyes wide with wonder. "See," Ethan said softly, "you're safe here, no one can reach you." As the day turned to evening, Ethan reflected on what had happened. The palace was full of dangers, political factions, jealous advisors, and powerful psychic forces. But he also realized that humans had strengths that even advanced civilizations sometimes overlooked: courage, creativity, empathy, and the ability to inspire trust across species. The Queen had already seen glimpses of this. Her initial surprise at the child hiding behind a human had evolved into curiosity and perhaps even respect. Ethan knew that he would need to continue proving himself, not with force, but with understanding and integrity. Humans could navigate situations that technology alone could not solve. That was their advantage. Lyra sat beside him, still quiet but less fearful. She had chosen to trust a human, and in doing so had shifted the balance of power in ways she did not yet understand. Ethan could feel her small hand brushing against his arm from time to time, a reminder that trust was both fragile and powerful. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the chamber door. Ethan tensed, signaling Lyra to stay behind him. A voice spoke in careful tones, one that Ethan recognized from the court. "May I come in? She wishes to understand why the child is with you." Even in the court, our choices matter. Sometimes, courage is simply doing what is right, even when the odds are against you. The night settled over Zyphora, the twin suns dipping below the horizon and casting the city in shades of blue and violet. Ethan sat with Lyra, watching the lights of the palace shimmer. He knew the next days would be filled with tests, intrigue, and dangers he could not yet foresee. But for now, he allowed himself a quiet thought. Humans had made a difference. A child had chosen to trust him. And in the palace of Zyphora, that trust was the beginning of something far greater than either of them could imagine. The palace may have been advanced, the politics dangerous, and the psychic abilities powerful, but one human's courage and compassion had shifted the balance. And sometimes, Ethan realized, that was enough to change the course of history. The next morning, the palace was alive with whispers and movement. Word had spread quickly that the princess's child had chosen a human as a protector. Some officials were outraged. Others were curious. Yet no one dared approach Ethan or Lyra directly without permission from the queen herself. Ethan prepared for the day carefully. He knew the palace would be watching, testing, and judging his every move. Humans had strengths, but the Xiphorans were clever and they would not give trust easily. He moved quietly through the corridors with Lyra beside him, her small hand brushing against his sleeve. She was more confident than yesterday, but still cautious. "Today is important," Ethan said softly. "We have to show them that we mean no harm." Crystal panels reflected the sunlight from the twin suns, scattering rainbows across the floor. At the far end, the queen sat in her throne, her silver hair catching the light. The council of advisors stood around her, their expressions sharp and calculating. Every eye in the room seemed to weigh Ethan and Lyra at once. "Human," the queen said, her voice calm but commanding, "you have shown courage in protecting my child. But courage alone is not enough in this court. You must demonstrate understanding, respect, and wisdom." Crystal spheres, tools that looked like instruments, and a scroll of some kind lay arranged carefully. "This is your test," the queen said. "You must show that you can navigate our laws, our customs, and the needs of my child. Your choices will determine whether the court accepts you as a protector or views your actions as interference." This was a test of intellect, understanding, and diplomacy. Humans had faced difficult situations before, but never on this scale among beings who could sense thoughts and intentions with ease. Lyra stepped forward slightly, her amber eyes wide. Ethan placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Stay close to me," he whispered. "We will do this together." "You may begin," she said. Ethan studied the objects on the platform. Some seemed harmless, others radiated energy that made his skin tingle. He realized the test was not just about understanding Lyra, but about understanding the consequences of actions in a world so different from his own. He had to act with care, thought, and honesty. He picked up the scroll. Symbols flowed across it in a language he only partially understood. But the meaning was clear. It outlined the expectations for the child, the dangers of misuse of her abilities, and the consequences for the court if she were exploited. Ethan read aloud as best as he could, his voice steady. He paraphrased where he could not translate, explaining the risks and emphasizing Lyra's right to choose her own path. Several advisors murmured. Some looked displeased, their faces tight with disapproval. But others leaned forward, listening. Humans did not always follow rules blindly, but they considered consequences carefully. That alone impressed some in the council. Next, Ethan approached one of the crystal spheres. It glowed faintly, as though aware of his presence. He realized it was a device to test focus and emotional control. Lyra's gaze followed him intently. He understood that the test was not only for himself, but for her as well. She would have to trust him in navigating the challenge. Ethan focused. He imagined calmness, stability, and protection. The sphere pulsed, then settled, shining steadily without disruption. A ripple of approval ran through the observers. Humans were unpredictable, but sometimes unpredictability worked in their favor. Courage combined with clarity often allowed them to succeed where others would fail. One advisor stepped forward, skeptical. "And the child?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Will you use her gift for your own ends?" Humans had a way of speaking from the heart that even advanced civilizations could not ignore. The queen observed quietly, her expression unreadable. She had seen courage, yes, but now she needed wisdom and judgment. She gestured to another device, a puzzle-like structure that required reasoning and problem-solving. Ethan recognized it as a test of strategy and foresight. He approached it carefully, studying the pieces. They were delicate, but the pattern was clear. Each action affected multiple outcomes. He moved slowly, considering each placement. Lyra watched, pointing out subtle shifts that Ethan might have missed. Together, they solved the puzzle, creating a stable configuration that demonstrated insight, patience, and teamwork. A murmur of astonishment passed through the council. Humans rarely demonstrated such focus and collaboration in alien matters. Even the queen's lips twitched, betraying a hint of admiration. Then, without warning, the puzzle reacted. A small energy surge shot upward, harmless but startling. Lyra instinctively extended her hand, guiding the energy back into the sphere. The chamber gasped. She had used her gift instinctively to protect them both. Ethan caught her hand gently. "It's okay, you did well," he whispered. He understood that even small gestures of psychic ability could be misinterpreted. The court needed to see that her talent was not a tool for manipulation, but a part of her being. The queen's eyes lingered on them. She had expected humans to be fragile, emotional, or unprepared. Instead, they had acted with calm, intelligence, and a protective instinct that even advanced Xiphorans found difficult to match. She nodded slightly. "You have passed many of the tests," she said, her voice measured. "But there is one final trial." He knew the court might attempt to test loyalty, courage, or moral integrity in ways that could be subtle or dangerous. Humans had faced challenges before, but this test would require the combination of every strength they possessed. The final trial involved a simulation of court politics. Holographic projections appeared, showing advisors plotting, allies faltering, and threats emerging from every direction. Ethan realized this was a test of foresight, decision-making, and trust. He needed to guide Lyra through it without succumbing to fear, anger, or rash action. He moved carefully, analyzing the patterns. He spoke softly to Lyra, explaining each step, letting her make small decisions to reinforce her agency. Together, they navigated the simulation, avoiding traps and resolving conflicts through negotiation and clever insight. Some advisors leaned forward, impressed. Humans rarely demonstrated such strategic thinking in alien political systems. Others frowned, unwilling to admit the possibility that a human could succeed where they might fail. The Queen watched silently. Ethan could feel her curiosity growing, the slight shift in her perspective. Humans were not just physical beings. They were thinkers, protectors, and allies capable of creativity beyond expectation. Finally, the simulation ended. The projections faded. The chamber was silent. Then the Queen spoke. "You have shown courage, wisdom, and loyalty. You have protected my child and guided her safely. You have not relied on force or fear, but on intelligence, empathy, and understanding." Some were still skeptical, but the pattern was clear. The human had proven himself in ways no one had anticipated. Lyra's small smile reflected relief, trust, and admiration. She had faced danger before, but now she understood that humans could be allies, protectors, and friends. The Queen rose from her throne, her voice calm but filled with authority. "Let it be known that the human has earned the right to remain with the child. Let him continue as protector, observer, and guide. Any who oppose this judgment will answer to me." The balance of power in the palace had subtly shifted, and all who watched understood that change had come. Ethan exhaled quietly, looking at Lyra. "We did it," he whispered. She nodded, her small hand brushing against his sleeve. For Ethan, this was more than a victory. It was proof that humans could succeed in situations where technology, power, or status alone were not enough. Courage, empathy, patience, and intelligence, the human strengths, could overcome even the most complex alien challenges. As they left the chamber, Ethan realized the court's tests had only begun. There would be new challenges, dangers, and intrigues, but now the foundation was set. Humans could act with integrity and strength, and even a child's trust could change the course of events in a palace ruled by tradition, power, and expectation. Lyra walked beside him quietly, her head held high. She had witnessed a human act with courage and reason. She had learned that even beings who seemed different, fragile, or strange could inspire safety, loyalty, and hope. The palace halls shimmered under the twin suns, reflecting a future that had never existed before. A human had proven himself in ways even the Queen had not predicted. And in that quiet, shining moment, both human and alien realized that trust, courage, and intelligence could be more powerful than any law, weapon, or spell. Ethan held Lyra's hand gently as they moved forward. He knew that the real challenges were yet to come, that the court was not fully united, and that danger still lurked. But he also knew this. Humans had a way of rising to challenges, of finding solutions when none seemed possible, and of inspiring loyalty and trust even in the most skeptical of hearts. And so, as the twin suns cast long shadows through the palace, a human and a child walked side by side, ready to face whatever the court, the advisors, or the world might throw at them next. Humanity had made its mark, and it was only the beginning. The palace had grown quieter by mid-morning, but Ethan knew that silence was often more dangerous than noise. The court was still tense from the previous day's trials. Many advisors were wary of him now, whispering in hidden corners about the human who had successfully guided the princess's child through the tests. Some feared him, others respected him in a way they would never admit aloud, and there were those who plotted against him. Ethan led Lyra through a lesser-known corridor that he had discovered in his observations. The corridor ran along the side of the palace, partially hidden by tall, crystalline panels. Light from the twin suns reflected in muted colors across the walls, creating an almost magical glow. It was quiet here, but Ethan's senses were alert. Danger could appear from anywhere. "Are we going to hide again?" Lyra whispered, clutching his sleeve. "No," Ethan replied calmly. We're going to move safely. Sometimes being cautious is smarter than hiding. She had already experienced moments where fear had driven her to panic, but with Ethan, she could think clearly. That trust was something she had not felt with anyone in the palace before. As they moved, Ethan noticed subtle signs of movement in the shadows. Servants and junior officials peeked from behind panels, observing them curiously. Some followed silently at a distance, perhaps intrigued by the human's presence, perhaps unsure if they should report him. Ethan knew he needed allies, even small ones, to navigate the dangers ahead. Humans often turned small chances into advantages, and he intended to do the same here. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind a corner, a guard, tall and imposing, his violet eyes sharp. Ethan froze, motionless, while Lyra shrank slightly behind him. The guard stopped, studying them for a long moment. Ethan did not flinch, did not speak, and kept his hands open and visible. Humans had a way of showing confidence without threat. After what felt like an eternity, the guard tilted his head and passed them, muttering under his breath. Ethan exhaled quietly. That was a small victory, but every small victory counted in the palace of Zyphora. One wrong step, one misread signal, and their position could collapse instantly. Finally, they reached a narrow stairwell leading to a lower section of the palace. This area was rarely used by the main court, reserved mostly for storage, maintenance, and minor officials. Ethan guided Lyra carefully down the steps, keeping his senses alert for any sign of pursuit. "Why are we going here?" Lyra asked quietly. "This is where we can be safe for a little while," Ethan replied. "We can plan our next move without anyone watching us too closely." Humans had a way of making even strangers feel protected, and she felt it now more than ever. Her small body had been frightened, hunted, and unsure for so long, yet with Ethan she had space to breathe. They entered a small maintenance chamber. It was dimly lit but secure, with thick walls that blocked most surveillance. Ethan closed the door carefully and scanned the room. There were crates and panels that could provide cover if needed. This was not a palace room for comfort, but it was safe, and that was enough for now. Ethan crouched near Lyra, lowering his voice. "We have to be careful. Some people in the court do not want us to succeed. They will try to find her or test her again. We need a plan." She had been observing him closely and had started understanding his logic. "Can we leave the palace?" she asked softly. Ethan considered this. Leaving the palace would be dangerous. The grounds were monitored by guards, drones, and sensors attuned to psychic signals. But humans had a talent for improvising and finding ways where none seemed possible. He smiled faintly. "Yes, we can. But we must be smart. Timing, patience, and small actions are key." The human mind excelled in improvisation, and he was confident that, with her cooperation, they could navigate the dangers ahead. As they prepared to leave, Ethan noticed small changes in Lyra. She had grown bolder, more observant, and willing to contribute. Humans often thrived in partnership, and her instincts were improving under his guidance. She pointed out a loose panel that could be shifted to create a temporary path of cover. Ethan nodded, impressed. Trust and cooperation were growing between them, and that bond would be their greatest strength. They moved carefully, sliding along the walls, using the shadows as cover. The palace was quiet but not empty. Occasionally, they passed attendants or minor officials who froze at the sight of the child with the human. Some whispered, some gaped, but none interfered. Humans had a subtle power in such moments, the ability to inspire curiosity, loyalty, and even fear without a single gesture of force. Then they reached the outer perimeter of the palace grounds. Beyond the shimmering walls and gates, the city of Zyphora stretched beneath the twin suns, a mixture of light, crystal, and energy. The palace guards patrolled in predictable patterns, and Ethan noted the locations of drones and sensors. It would be risky, but they could slip through if they timed it perfectly. Ethan signaled for Lyra to stay close. "We move slowly, watch carefully, and only act when the moment is right," he whispered. Humans excelled at patience, and patience now could mean life or danger for the child. The first step onto the outer grounds was tense. The sensors hummed softly, scanning for unusual activity. Ethan led Lyra along the edge of the palace, where walls and decorative structures provided cover. They paused whenever a patrol passed, holding their breath until it was safe to move again. Lyra's grip on his sleeve tightened, and he smiled reassuringly. Halfway across the grounds, they encountered a young palace servant, likely curious about the child's absence. Ethan thought quickly. He knelt slightly and spoke in the servant's dialect, using kindness and logic rather than threat. "We are taking a safe path for the child. You can go back without fear. No one will be hurt." They continued their cautious journey, moving through shadows, ducking behind crystalline panels, and avoiding sensors. Ethan's mind raced, anticipating patrols and disturbances. Humans were adaptive, capable of calculating risks and acting with creativity under pressure. That adaptability was what had carried them through countless challenges across Earth and now in a palace on a distant planet. Finally, they reached a small, less monitored exit at the edge of the palace. Ethan examined it carefully. It led to a series of service tunnels that descended below the city's surface. It would be dark, tight, and uncomfortable, but it was safe. "Ready?" Ethan whispered to Lyra. She nodded, her small hand slipping into his. Humans had a unique way of offering protection simply through presence and calm determination. She understood that instinctively now. They entered the tunnels, moving cautiously. The air was cooler here, and the soft hum of the city above was replaced by the quiet echoes of their footsteps. Ethan used a small device to map their path, ensuring they would avoid any sensors or patrols that might detect them underground. Humans excelled at improvisation, and this was a test of both patience and intelligence. As they progressed, Ethan noticed subtle signs of pursuit, a faint shimmer of a sensor beam they had not noticed, a shadow moving slightly faster than it should have. He signaled Lyra to stop and pressed against the wall, waiting until the danger passed. "We have to move slowly," he whispered. "Patience now will keep us safe later." That skill could make all the difference. Hours seemed to pass as they navigated the tunnels. Ethan's mind never rested. He calculated patrol patterns, energy flows, and possible hiding spots. Humans had a unique ability to process complexity quickly, balancing logic and intuition. That ability, combined with his protective instinct, kept them both alive and moving steadily toward safety. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnels, where a hidden exit led to a quiet garden outside the palace walls. The twin suns cast warm light over the plants and fountains, and Ethan allowed himself a brief moment of relief. They were outside the immediate reach of the palace, though the city still lay ahead with unknown dangers. Lyra took a deep breath, smiling faintly for the first time in days. "We're safe," she asked. "For now," Ethan replied. "But we must stay careful. There are still people who want to control your gift, and we have to be smarter than them. Humans can do that. We can adapt, plan, and act where others fail." She had learned that humans were not just fragile creatures, but clever, brave, and protective. Even in a palace full of power, intrigue, and psychic talent, a human could be a force that shifted the balance. They rested briefly in the garden, observing the palace from a distance. Ethan noted patrols, energy fields, and minor weaknesses in the security network. Humans often saw patterns others overlooked, and he was already thinking ahead to the next step: how to protect Lyra, win allies, and navigate the challenges of the court without direct confrontation. The palace shimmered under the suns, a place of beauty, danger, and power. But Ethan knew one thing clearly: humans had an advantage that could not be measured by strength or technology alone. Courage, empathy, and intelligence could bend situations in ways no one expected. And together with Lyra, he would use those strengths to survive, protect, and maybe even change the course of the palace's history. As evening approached, Ethan and Lyra prepared to move again, deeper into the city beyond the palace walls. The real challenge was just beginning. Humans had survived the court, outsmarted the palace, and protected a royal child. Now they would have to navigate a world full of intrigue, danger, and opportunity, relying not on force, but on trust, creativity, and courage. The city stretched before them, lights twinkling and energy flowing. They were still a long way from safety, but Ethan knew that together, human ingenuity and Lyra's gifts could carry them through. Humans had always faced impossible odds, and humans had always found a way. And in the quiet light of the twin suns, a human and a child moved forward, ready to face whatever came next. The city outside the palace stretched in shimmering patterns of crystal towers and glowing streets under the twin suns. Ethan and Lyra moved carefully through the quiet alleyways, avoiding the gaze of patrolling drones and the occasional royal guard. Every step forward was a careful calculation. Humans were not as strong or fast as Zyphorans, but their minds were clever, and their ability to adapt was unmatched. Ethan relied on that now more than ever. "This way," he whispered, guiding Lyra along a narrow path between two buildings. "We need to find a place to hide until we can talk to the Queen. She must understand what is happening." Humans excelled at creating solutions where others saw no options. "Yes," he said finally. But we have to show her that our intentions are true, that we are not here to harm, only to protect. That is the way to reach her. Humans could use observation to turn even a heavily guarded location into a path of opportunity. He led Lyra carefully, staying in shadow, until they reached a small entrance used by service staff. This would allow them to approach the queen discreetly without alerting the entire court. Inside, the palace was quieter than before, the hallways dimly lit but familiar. Ethan guided Lyra to a side chamber that overlooked the central court. From here, they could see the queen without immediately being noticed. "She is there," Ethan whispered. "We wait for the right moment. Humans are patient. That patience is our strength." Her small hand brushed against his arm, a silent reassurance that they were partners in this endeavor. Minutes passed slowly. Ethan studied the court below, noting the positions of the advisors and guards. Some were watching the throne, their expressions sharp and calculating. Others were whispering among themselves, uncertain how to respond to a human who had so far outmaneuvered the expectations of their culture. Humans had a way of acting unpredictably, and Xiphorans were still adjusting to that fact. Finally, the queen rose from her throne. Her silver hair caught the light as she moved, and her violet eyes scanned the chamber below. She seemed aware of their presence, though she said nothing. Ethan knew this was the moment. Timing and clarity would determine the outcome. Humans often succeeded through patience and precise action, and this was the moment to act. Ethan stepped forward slightly, making himself visible without appearing threatening. Lyra remained close, her small form steady. "Your Majesty," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm, "I come not to defy you but to protect your child. She is intelligent, strong, and capable, and she deserves safety and freedom to grow. The court would use her gift for its own ends if left unchecked, and that would bring harm to both her and the palace." "And what would you suggest, human?" she asked, her voice calm but full of authority. Ethan thought quickly, knowing that every word mattered. "Allow her to choose. Protect her not as a tool, but as a person. Let her learn, grow, and develop her gift on her own terms. If the court respects her agency, the palace will be stronger, not weaker. If they attempt to control her, it will cause unrest and division. I ask for trust, not obedience, and honesty, not fear." Ethan had spoken without arrogance, without aggression, and yet with undeniable courage. An advisor stepped forward, his tone sharp. "Your Majesty, he is only a human. How can he understand the complexities of court politics or the responsibilities of the princess's gift? I only need to protect a child. Humans are adaptable. We can learn quickly. And I know this. Harming her, controlling her, or using her as a tool will create chaos that none of us want. But protecting her, guiding her wisely, and respecting her choice will create stability and loyalty stronger than fear. You speak boldly, human. You risk your own safety to defend my child." But the queen's decision hung in the balance. Lyra stepped forward slightly, her small voice carrying courage beyond her years. "I trust him," she said simply. "He helps me, he listens. He does not try to control me. That is enough." But humans had a way of inspiring honesty and courage in others. Ethan smiled faintly, understanding that Lyra's trust was the most powerful statement he could have made. The queen's expression softened. She studied the child and the human together, seeing the bond that had formed through courage, patience, and empathy. She realized that humans had strengths that were different but not weaker than her own people's. They could act with moral clarity, protect the vulnerable, and inspire trust in ways that even the most advanced abilities could not replicate. "Very well," the queen said finally, her voice calm but decisive. "The child may remain under the guidance of the human. Any who oppose this will answer to me. Let it be known that courage and loyalty, not age, blood, or strength alone, determine trust in this palace." Ethan knew this was a rare moment, a moment where humanity had proven itself not by power but by character. Some advisors still looked uneasy, whispering among themselves. But the queen raised her hand, silencing them. "This decision is final. Protect the child, guide her wisely, and respect her choices. That is the path of wisdom." Lyra's eyes shone with relief and trust. Together, they had faced impossible odds, navigated political intrigue, and protected one another with courage and intelligence. But the day was not yet over. Ethan knew that trust alone would not protect them forever. He needed allies within the palace, individuals who understood that a child's safety required cooperation and foresight. Humans had a way of inspiring loyalty, even among those who had once been skeptical. He approached a small group of minor officials who had observed the trials closely. "Help us," he said quietly, not for reward, but because it is right. Protect her from those who would misuse her abilities. Guide the court wisely. Work with us, not against us. Humans often inspired action through clarity, sincerity, and courage. They could see that Ethan's intentions were genuine, and that their cooperation could strengthen the palace rather than undermine it. As evening approached, the twin suns dipped lower, casting long shadows across the palace. Ethan and Lyra walked together through the grand hall, now more confident and composed. The advisors and guards watched them, some with lingering suspicion, others with quiet respect. The queen followed, her presence a reminder that humans could indeed influence, protect, and inspire, even in a culture far more advanced than their own. Ethan glanced at Lyra. "You've been amazing," he said softly. "You trusted me, and that courage changed everything today." "I learned from you," she replied. "Humans are different, but different can be good. And that protecting those who cannot protect themselves is a virtue that transcends worlds." "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Now we continue, we learn, we grow, and we protect. The world is bigger than this palace, and there is much to do, but today we've proven something important. Humanity can make a difference." Ethan and Lyra walked side by side, ready to face whatever came next, confident that together, human ingenuity, courage, and empathy could overcome even the greatest challenges. The queen watched silently from her throne, knowing that a human had shifted the balance of power not through strength, but through wisdom and integrity. And somewhere deep in her heart, she understood that trust, courage, and moral clarity were more powerful than any weapon, any law, or any ability. Ethan and Lyra had survived the court, outsmarted the palace intrigues, and forged a bond that even the most advanced civilization could not ignore. The story of a human protector and a royal child would be remembered on Zyphora for generations, a testament to the quiet, unstoppable power of humanity. As night settled over the city, Ethan and Lyra looked out over the palace lights, their reflections dancing in the crystal towers. They had faced danger, tests, and doubt and emerged victorious, not through force, but through trust, courage, and intelligence. Humanity had proven itself once again, and this was only the beginning. In the vastness of the galaxy, among worlds of light, shadow, and power, a human and a child had shown that courage, empathy, and ingenuity could change the course of history. And that story, Ethan knew, would inspire generations yet to come.